almost every day it goes that Victoria is breaking COVID infection records until the next day, and of course it all goes up again. Today, the Victorian Chief Medical Officer seemed to think we were at the peak.
Today should be the peak. Now, I'm not going to sit back and say today's the peak. We have to see what happens in coming days. But driving that effective reproduction number down below 1 is the thing that will start to see numbers drop. And as numbers drop, outbreaks drop.
Well, he's clearly getting smarter at the press conference game, because only last week, when we saw a slight dip in numbers, he hopefully suggested Victoria might have been through the worst of it, only to hit a record number of cases today, and of course those numbers over the weekend. Anyone who seems to think that Victoria will get out of this 6-week lockdown in 6 weeks, you are kidding yourself. Joining me now for his analysis and more, the Australian's political editor, Dennis Shanahan. The point, Dennis, on the 6-week lockdown duration is relevant because only Thursday, when we were discussing the National Economic Statement, where the numbers in Victoria were predicated on a 6-week lockdown only. Now, I can't see that happening, and given the economic clout of Victoria, that's got to be a problem for the PM's numbers. They're not even 4 days old. Where to now for Victoria?
Well, when they released the numbers, Peter, I said it was optimistic. All the other commentators made the same point, that the entire outlook for the fiscal and economic outlook was based on Victoria returning, ending its lockdown within 6 weeks. Now, clearly that's not going to happen. And the other figures, of course, at the time were suggesting that the Victorian lockdown, separate to the other states, was going to be costing the national economy $3 billion. It's $1 billion a month, and now it is clear this is going to go further than just the 6 weeks that they anticipated. And so what we're actually going to see is yet another remaking of the figures before the budget in October. It is clear the federal government cannot make predictions in the way that they normally do for budgets. The pandemic is changing the complete ground rules. And this outbreak in Victoria is getting more serious by the day. And we know from other experiences that you end up with a lag. Even if things start to get better, you still have weeks of rising numbers. And that's the real problem here. No end in 6 weeks, and probably a lot longer than that.
I've got to ask you for a bit of a assessment here. You've been around politics a long time. I don't think I've seen such a rapid loss of trust so fast as I'm seeing here in Victoria. You know, we had the hotel quarantine failures, we've talked about those, the issues with the tracing system, and now this crisis in aged care. There'd hardly be anyone in the country who couldn't see where the aged care sector would be vulnerable way back in February. We certainly saw the experiences overseas. At what point do you think people are going to start demanding that the Prime Minister does more here, like he did on bushfires? Everybody knows this is not his issue, in that the states under the Constitution run their own internal affairs. But I think it's getting to the point that people are starting to demand, certainly here in Victoria, to me at least, they want a national response here.
Well, that's right, Peter. Look, the way that the National Cabinet was established, the way we've seen the new commission established today for job creation and so forth, it's all been about cooperation between the federal and state governments. As far as the Victorian government goes and the loss of faith, I mean, this is crucial to all governments during the pandemic, is to maintain faith. The real problem in the United States has been a lack of faith in the leadership and division between the federal and state leaders. So what we've actually seen in the US has been made worse by the leadership. What's happened in Victoria has been obviously very bad. They have not anticipated the problems that we already saw in New South Wales with the Ruby Princess, and they just didn't see it coming. And I think what's happened, the trust you mentioned, how it suddenly collapsed in Victoria, is that there was, in a way, a pent-up demand. This is similar to the fall we saw of Kevin Rudd in 2008, 2009, when his popularity started to slide and no one quite twigged as to what was happening. I think Daniel Andrews has had a honeymoon for much longer than expected in Victoria, but now suddenly a large number of people are starting to say, hold on, we don't like what he's been doing all along, and now this has just accelerated that loss of faith. This is a real danger for Australia nationally. We need to maintain faith in our political leadership, otherwise dealing with the pandemic will fail.
I want to ask you a quick question on the OECD numbers. They say today the numbers are out. Australia leads the world in terms of the highest minimum wage. A number of our businesses are saying, though, this will severely hamper our prospects of recovery and how long it takes us to get back on our feet post-COVID, going through this recession, obviously. The head of the Australian Industry Group, Key Employer Association, had this to say.
The OECD this week has told us that we have the world's highest minimum wage again. So we're stuck in a high wage economy. So we need to work our way out of it with things like tax reform, skills and training, regulatory reform, IR reform. These are the only ways we're going to build jobs, and that's what we need to do.
So where to now, Dennis?
Well, I think that Josh Frydenberg would agree with Innes Willicks there. That what we need to do is look at real change as we come out of the pandemic. And that's why Josh Frydenberg alluded to the need for changes to industrial relations reform. And we already saw a very quick response, partly because he used Margaret Thatcher as the example, probably a bit of a red rag to the Labor bull in Australia. Mm-hmm. But the point here is that productivity has to improve. These rules that have been changed need to be extended if we are to have a competitive resurgence of the economy. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a high minimum wage with no one actually earning it.
Just a quick one on China. The Australian government's taken a position about the South China Sea, now calling it illegal. Obviously, the Chinese have, gone apoplectic about that over the weekend. Should Australia move now to formalise freedom of navigation exercises?
Look, this is a very fraught decision. Australia is doing the right thing in standing up and declaring that China's actions are illegal. We already know it's illegal because the World Court has said so. They have found that it's illegal. Australia's doing the right thing, and Australia shouldn't back down on suggestions that it not be provocative. I think that the idea of navigation has been open for Australia, and what we shouldn't do is some gunboat diplomacy where we advertise what we're going to do. What we need to do is have a quiet flyover of the space and then later just say, oh, yes, we've done that. Not to be provocative. But let's keep in perspective that the China is saying, oh, they're threatening our beef and our wine if we don't exports, if we don't do what they want. Well, what happened last week? Australia exported $100 billion worth of iron ore. And where did most of it go? China. Let's keep pragmatic. Let's keep realistic.
And thank you for persevering through a blackout to join us tonight. A little bit of candlelight. You'll have a romantic dinner with your wife now when you get off there. Thank you very much.
Yes, we'll have. Thanks very much, Peter.